This session is a mysterious journey about ghosts and spirits and poltergeists. Imagine this. You're alone at night and the house has gone quiet. A floorboard creaks, but there's no one there. A cold shiver runs up your spine, and just for a second, you're sure that someone is in the room with you. What is it that you've just felt? A ghost? A spirit? A poltergeist? Or something else? These words get thrown around all the time, but they each carry their own mystery. So let's step carefully into the shadows together. A ghost traditionally is thought to be the soul of someone who has died but hasn't quite left us. They might appear in human form, like the brown lady of Raynham Hall, gliding down her staircase, caught in that eerie 1936-ish photograph. Or they might be more subtle, a perfume in the air, or a whisper or a sense of someone watching from the corner of the room. But what if ghosts aren't dead at all? What if they are recordings of moments impressed on the walls like emotional fingerprints? Imagine the atmosphere of an old battlefield or a centuries-old house. Could the stone itself remember tragedy, replaying fragments to those sensitive enough to tune in? Spirit is a wider, older word. It can mean an ancestor, a protective guide, or something not human at all. Nature or nature spirits, elementals, tricksters. In Japan, spirits of the dead appear as yurai, pale and bound by emotions so strong that they cling to the living. In China, people honor their ancestors at the Hungry Ghost Festival, making sure that restless souls are fed and remembered. Spirits can comfort though, can't they? They can guide, or they can terrify. Which they are often depends on the story you bring to them. Now, poltergeists are something different, aren't they? The word is actually German. Polten, to make noise, and geist, spirit, so a noisy spirit. They're famous not for appearing, but for doing things. Knocks on the walls, lights flickering on and off, chairs sliding across the floor. I'm sure you've seen it in countless films or countless series on the TV. The Enfield poltergeist of the late 1970s is the most famous. Furniture moved, voices spoke through children, reporters swore that they saw levitations, and some were convinced that it was trickery. Others believed no child could possibly fake the things that they witnessed. But here's the mystery. Poltergeist activity often clusters around one person. Usually someone young, stressed, or going through upheaval. Could these noisy ghosts be externalized energy from the living, rather than the dead? Of course, science has its own explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning, causing hallucinations, low-frequency infrasound, making us feel watched, toxic mold, stirring anxiety, even our own brains, half awake, half asleep, conjuring up shadowy figures in moments when we're paralyzed. But science doesn't answer why so many stories sound alike across the centuries and the continents, all over the world really. Why do the bereaved so often sense their loved ones? Why do old houses and battlefields hum with atmosphere? I live in an old house, and I definitely feel the atmosphere here. And I used to own a house in Sicily. It was a rock house, so it was literally a cave house on the rock side. And that was incredibly atmospheric. So, across time in Christianity, some call them souls in purgatory. Others warn they may be demons in disguise. In Islam, such phenomena are sometimes attributed to jinn, which are ancient beings of smokeless fire. In Hinduism and Buddhism, spirits may be souls awaiting rebirth, bound by desire or karma. And indigenous peoples worldwide often see spirits as natural, the ongoing presence of ancestors or the living world. Every culture recognizes them. The names change, but the mystery remains. So why do we still believe? For some, ghosts are hoaxes, tricks of the mind or environment. For others, they remind us of the sacredness of place and add depth to our stories. Even skeptics admit there are cases that remain unsolved that leave a faint question mark in the air. So what are they? Ghosts, fragments of the dead still wandering? Spirits, forces older, wider than humanity? Poltergeists, our own energy lashing out when we can't contain it? Or simply the brain, the body and the house conspiring to trick us? The truth may be different for every story, and maybe that's the greatest mystery of all, that these encounters tell us as much about ourselves as about the world beyond. Now imagine the next time a floorboard creaks in the night, will you hear an old house settling? Or will you wonder who or what has come to visit? So here's the twist. I actually do believe in ghosts and spirits, and I've had experience of them firsthand. And I know what I saw, and I know what I heard, and I know what happened to me because it was so graphic. Anyway, this is my story. Like I said before, I used to own a house in Sicily. It was a cave house, and it had so much atmosphere. It was absolutely crazy. It really did feel incredibly, incredibly interesting, and it was very, very old. So how I got to buy that cave house was because I had friends, and their friend's mother was actually selling this house. But it had been up for sale for a long, long time because nobody wanted to touch it, because there had been poltergeist activity in the house. And the priests had been brought in 3 times to exorcise this house. But unfortunately, when the priests were there, they also witnessed that experience, and they didn't want anything to do with it. So it ended up being about 15 years empty. And when I went to see it, because I went with friends to literally pick the grapes and what have you, because it was harvest time for the grapes. And so we decided we'd go over there, and that house came up in the conversation. Anyway, so we got there, and I said, oh, I'd love to go and have a look inside. So they went and got the key from a lovely, lovely lady called Maria. And they brought it back, and I said, right, let's go in and have a little bit of an explore. But they wouldn't come in because they were very superstitious and they knew the stories behind the house. So when I went in, it was like a huge, great big wooden door, very, very heavy, heavy wooden door. And when I went in, it was almost like the dust had like woofed up in the air as I opened the door. And you could smell that it was almost like the smell like a cellar would have, where it hadn't been aired for a long, long time. And the scene in front of me looked like something from Dickens, where Mrs. Havisham or Miss Havisham was, sort of waiting for her wedding, and everything was in disarray and everything was covered in cobwebs, and there were chairs on the floor. And as I walked through into the different rooms, it's really, really big inside. When I walked through different rooms, the beds were still made. Some had been, sort of literally left unmade, and toys all over the floor. And everything was literally as if the whole family had up sticks and had run out of that house. Which, of course, later on I found out was exactly what had happened, because they had endured a lot of poltergeist activity and they just didn't want to live there anymore, hence putting it up for sale. So when I went to speak with Maria, Maria told me that it was £3,000. Well, this was a long, long time ago, about probably 30 years ago. And £5,000, I would have thought would have been a decent price for something tiny in Sicily at the time. But she wanted 3 for this very big cave house. So, of course, I said yes and bought it and had to do all sorts of different work on it. But over the time, when I started going back to this house, I started hearing stories. And lots of different stories from lots of different people. And of course, they started to understand that I was a psychologist, but also I was a healer, in the sense of I facilitated healing. So immediately they thought I was what they would call a santa, which is saint in Sicilian, a person who deals with healing energy. So each time I used to go, I used to have queues of people outside the door, but they wouldn't come into the house because they all knew that this house was haunted, that this house had poltergeist activity. Well, whenever I was in that house, it felt amazing. There was nothing that was sinister. It felt incredibly peaceful. I loved emptying it all out and getting it clean, and then thinking about what I was going to do and how I was going to reconfigure the inside of the house, and once we got the builders in. So for me, it was always a total delight to come over to this house. Anyway, a little time later, when I did have the builders in and they started to work, I was in one of the rooms, and there was a man who came into the doorway of the room, and he said his name was Enzo and that he wanted to talk to me. So I was presuming that this was about the building work that they were doing, that there was a challenge or a problem or something. So I said, right, yes, not a problem. I'll pop out in a minute. I'll come and see you, come and find you, and we can discuss whatever it is that you want to talk to me about. So I looked at him and I thought, he was quite a tall man, a very handsome man, quite strongly built, but his clothing was a little unusual. He was wearing clogs, and he had trousers that were sort of high-waisted trousers, that he had this very thick leather belt that was knotted, to keep, obviously, his trousers up. And he had sort of like a granddad type shirt, the ones that don't have a collar on them, and the sleeves were rolled up. And I could see him completely, his face, everything. Just, I thought at that time he was just this normal person. Anyway, when I went out and went down onto the different levels, because this house was built on a terrace, lots of different levels, because it was on the side of the mountain. And I went down to one of the terraces to the builders and I said, "Oh, could you tell me where Enzo is, because he wants to speak to me?" And they said, "There isn't anybody called Enzo here." So I thought, well, that's funny, or a bit odd, because he did tell me his name was Enzo, but maybe I misheard it or misunderstood what his name was, and it wasn't Enzo. Anyway, I couldn't find anybody or any of the builders who were there who were wanting to speak to me. So a little while later, I went down to Maria's house. Now, she lived just down the way from this house, from the house that I'd bought. And she lived in a modern Italian home. And when I say modern, it was probably about 50 or 60 years old, but it was a modern type house. And she was elderly. She was in her late 80s. And she was the one who sold me the house. So I thought I'd pop down and just tell her, what I was doing, what my plans were, and just to get to know her because I wanted to, sort of get to know a bit about the history and about the people that lived in the house and everything else. So when I went there, we had a espresso and sat down on her lovely chairs by her table, and all around me there were loads and loads and loads of photographs in beautiful ornate frames, and lots of old black and white ones, some sepia ones, some modern ones, and these were all of her family, and she'd collected the older ones from her mother and so on and so forth. And this is a tradition, I feel, in Sicily. They tend to have these beautiful rooms that were full of their, traditions and their history and their lineage and everything else. So it was really lovely. But when I was looking around at one of them had Enzo in it. So, of course, I got up and picked it up and went over to her and I said, "Oh, this is Enzo." And she said, "Yes." So I said, "Oh, I feel awful now. I feel really rude because Enzo came to speak to me and I thought he was one of the builders. And when I went out to find him, they said obviously there wasn't a builder called Enzo. And it must have been your family who had come up to see what we were doing. And I feel awful now because I should have invited him in and everything else." And she looked very bewildered. And she said, "That can't be because that's my granddad." Now, she was in her late 80s, and this was her granddad. So I thought, right, okay. His name was definitely Enzo, and this was definitely the man that I'd seen in the doorway in the house. So then she started telling me a story. And the story was Enzo had had an arranged marriage, which all Sicilians up to probably the 70s would have arranged marriages. And he had fallen in love with somebody else. And of course, that somebody else was already promised to another man. And so he never was able to marry the woman that he had fallen in love with. He had to marry the woman that his family had decided was the right one for him, the arranged marriage. So he married this woman and they had 5 children. So 7 of them, the 5 children and Enzo and his wife, lived in our cave house. And they grew up their family there. And apparently he was known for being very, very serious, not much fun, and a bit sort of frugal with how he kept his family. So he wouldn't give them much money. And of course, his wife would have to feed 7 people on a very small amount of money. But that's the way he sort of ruled the roost. But the other thing that was very strange was the house next door, the other cave house next door. This love of his life ended up living there with her husband. And her husband was quite rich because he was given a dowry by her family and they were quite wealthy. So he used to boast a lot about having lots of golden coins and lots of money and this, that and the other. So the whole of the area, the village, the immediate vicinity of where these houses were, all the neighbours knew that he was really, really rich. And then one day he was killed and his money was stolen. Now, a lot of people immediately thought it was Enzo who had done this because in Sicily there's all sorts of different rules over there. There's the rules of passion in the sense of if somebody kills somebody because of some love interest or whatever, that could be a crime of passion and they wouldn't necessarily be taken into prison or whatever. But But a lot of people thought that he was the one who killed the woman that he was in love with and taken the money. Now, Maria said that her mother, who was one of the 5 children, used to tell her often that her father, Enzo, would tell the children and tell his wife that there was money, a lot of money, in the house, but they would walk on it, they would be walking on it, and they would never find it. So they presumed that when he died, he would let the family know where this money was, but he didn't. He died and he took the secret with him. So that's the story that Maria told me. And then she pointed to another picture, and on this picture, a photograph, there was Enzo and a set of children, and he was a young man then, and next to him was this woman, and this woman looked the spitting image of me. It was really strange. I mean, the hairs went up on the back of my neck and what have you. It was really strange. It was as if I was looking at myself in, old-fashioned clothing. Anyway, that was quite a story to go back to the house. And when I went back to the house, a few days later, some of Maria's family came over and said, Maria's told you the story, but we think you might know where the gold is because you're a medium. And I'm sure that you know because Mum has told us that you have seen Enzo, and Enzo must have told you. And I said, well, no, he didn't. Yes, I have, and no, he didn't. And I'm as shocked as you are because I didn't realise that Enzo wasn't one of my builders because he was completely solid in the doorway and I could see everything. And we spoke together. And I said, I don't know why he came. And they said, because you look like the woman that he was in love with. We honestly feel that's why. So Enzo may have told you where the gold is. So I said, I have no idea, but if you want, you can dig up as much as you want inside the house, so the floors, which all needed to be replaced anyway. You can search everywhere. So underneath the rock house, on a different level, there was other caves which were used for chickens and animals, and they would have chicken wire in front. I said, you can go in there, you can dig everything up, you can search everywhere. But when I come back in 6 weeks' time, then obviously I'll have the builders in to complete the renovations. So do your best, because I'm only interested in the house, not the money. So when I returned 6 weeks later, it was like a building site. They'd literally got pickaxes to the floors. I couldn't say anything because I'd given them permission to do whatever they wanted to do, but they'd looked absolutely everywhere and they'd never found the gold coins. Anyway, those floors were put back and renovated, and of course we had the house for quite some time, and then I sold it about 4 or 5 years ago to a German man who was an artist, and he wanted to buy the house because of the beautiful views that went down onto the city of Modica. So that's my ghost story. So Enzo, I saw him there. I heard him. He was completely solid. I then got information, and I got proof that this was Enzo because I saw the photographs and also the photograph of me. So that was absolutely an incredible experience. And I just thought I'd like to share that with you. I do have others, and I will, as the podcasts go on, I might put the others into the podcast as well. Because I do live in an old house and we have caught all sorts of things on camera here. So I may put that in the show notes at a later stage. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining me today. This podcast is free to listen to, and if you'd like to help me keep creating it, you can support the show through my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Every bit of support means the world. And if you'd like to go deeper into your own journey, come and visit me at margaretdepetro.com. You'll find ways to book tarot readings with me, courses, Reiki and healing appointments, meditations, and lots more waiting for you there. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep walking your own beautiful path.